Hello and welcome back to my Tandy 1000 TL. So in this video we're going to go over the hardware side of things. We are going to be looking at the various components of the computer. We're going to be looking at the mainboard in detail, look at the memory configuration, and perform some memory upgrades. But I want to start off with looking at the various display options that we have on our Tandy 1000 TL. So as you can see, I have this hooked up to my IBM CGA monitor, the 5153, which works fine with this Tandy 1000 TL, allowing you to expose the beautiful Tandy graphics. But on the front here, you see that you can also use a monochrome monitor. So instead of using the IBM 5153, you could also opt to use a monochrome 5151 monitor, for example, or another old monitor that you might still have. Now, using a special keyboard combination, you can actually switch the video mode of the Tandy 1000 to either monochrome mode, as you can see here, or into the normal color mode, which is the CGA or the Tandy graphics mode. But like I said in the beginning, this is going to be a hardware-oriented video, so let's open up the case and let's see what we have inside so that we can take it apart, see what's inside and what the various components are. To open up the case, we just need to open up two screws, slide the case forward a little bit, and then we can just take it off like this. Note that on the chassis here you have the holes for the screws here, and on the case itself you have this bulging thing here that fits into this chassis. So the time has come to take it apart. So we'll start with this 5 1/4 inch floppy drive, which has these plastic clips here that we can use to pull it out. So this is a 360K 5 1/4 inch floppy drive. I don't know what this bracket is for, but I'm going to go ahead and remove it. So this is the hard drive tray, so you can put in a 3.5 inch hard drive into the case. We have the 3.5 inch floppy drive here, 720K, which slides right on out. And then we can already get a better view of the mainboard, which looks like an XT mainboard because, well, it is, but it does have the 286 CPU to give it just that extra little boost in speed. Now, as you can see on the back, there are no visible screws, and that's because they're hidden away by this piece of plastic here. Now, we need to carefully remove this plastic, making sure that we don't break off any plastic bits here, which is always a bit challenging. Now, what you need to do is you need to remove these two little clips here on the bottom, and they are there on both sides. So we'll start with this side, and then we'll switch over the case to the other side. And we can do the same thing there. So that will remove the bottom half of the plastic. And what you need to do then is you need to put the case back horizontally. And then you can kind of pull the piece of plastic on upwards and it should wiggle its way out. It was a bit difficult to remove here because a non-standard screw was used on one of the expansion slots. So here we have the power supply visible with the power supply fan. So we'll just go ahead and remove a couple of screws here to get the power supply out of the case. Before we do that, we are going to be removing the power button mechanism here, which is this plastic stick here, which extrudes from the case and attaches itself to the power supply. And once that's removed, we can disconnect the power supply from the main board and get the entire power supply unit out of the case. Here we can take a better look at the power supply, which is half open. There are no visible issues to be seen with the caps, although you can never be sure. So here we have the main board exposing some of its secrets now. We have the 5 ISA slots, 8-bit. We have the memory section here, 640K. We have our 286 CPU. We have an integrated floppy drive connector. We have some circuitry here for I/O, keyboard, joysticks. But let's go and remove some of the screws here so that we can get the entire main board out, so that we can have a much better close-up view of the important components which are on this main board. We're also going to be removing the PC speaker here. As usual, there is always one pesky screw that prevents you from extracting something. So this one is kind of hidden away beneath the PC speaker, so I'm just going to remove it so that I have more easy access. We also have the volume control knob for the speaker, so I'm going to be removing that, otherwise I won't be able to slide the main board out. And on the back we have UNC style screws that we need to remove from the connectors, because this entire back plate here also needs to go, and this is held on by just one screw, and it kind of clicks in beneath the case. So I'm just going to be removing the screw here, slide it on out, and then with all of the screws removed, we should be able to just slide out the main board from the case and take a close look at it. So here I've laid out all the components of our Tandy 1000 TL. We have the main board here, the power supply. We have the 2 disk drives, the 3.5-inch and the 5.25-inch. We have the hard drive tray, and we have the speaker. So that's what makes up a Tandy 1000 TL. So let's take a look at every individual component now. Here we have the 65-watt power supply, which seems to be in pretty good condition. Here we have the TAC 5.25-inch disk drive, which is a 360 kilobyte disk drive. We also have a 3.5-inch disk drive, which is a 720 kilobyte one from Sony. So this is a kind of a proprietary connector, as the power for the floppy drive is also provided by the flat cable, as opposed to the normal 4-pin Molex connector you see on traditional drives. And here we have the speaker, which is hooked up to the 3-voice Tandy system, which produces that fabulous Tandy sound, a much better sound than the traditional PC speaker. And here we have the main board with lots of stuff integrated on it. So as opposed to the PC, where you need a lot of expansion slots, you will see that on this main board we already have lots of stuff integrated on the board, such as video, I/O, floppy drive connector, memory. And let's take a closer look at the important components that make up this Tandy 1000 TL on the main board. So we'll start at the heart of the main board, which is the CPU, which is an AMD 286 clocked at 8 MHz with an optional floating point unit, which is not installed here. We have 5 8-bit ISA expansion slots. So this is effectively an 8-bit XT-based machine with a 286 CPU. Here we have the power connector, which is a proprietary connector for Tandy. We also have a coin cell, which is hooked up to a Dallas real-time clock chip, allowing you to preserve the date and time. Here we have the memory section. When the machine starts, it indicates that it has 640 kilobytes of memory, which is in fact these 2 banks here that you see, plus the 4 additional chips. Now, I do need to say that the 640 kilobyte isn't entirely available to MS-DOS, as 128 kilobyte is used for the video system. So let's take a look at the memory situation. When we start a computer, we see that the memory size is reported as 640 kilobytes. But that's not really the case, because if you do a mem in MS-DOS, you'll see that you only have 576 kilobytes. Now, in order to understand what's going on here, we need to look at the memory configuration on the Tandy 1000. Here you can see the different memory banks. And as you can see, we have 16 chips here, Samsung branded chips. And these are in a 256K x 1 configuration, meaning that they provide 32 kilobytes per chip. Now, because we have 16 of them, this already gives us 512 kilobytes of system RAM. Now, in the Tandy 1000, we also have 4 Sharp branded memory chips, and these are made up in a 64K x 4 configuration, again giving us 32 kilobytes of RAM per chip. And as there are 4 chips here, this gives us an additional 128 kilobytes of RAM. Now, the RAM chips that are installed in these sockets are used by the video controller. So the video controller basically has 128 kilobytes of video RAM available, but it doesn't need all of them. So although it steals this memory away from DOS, it also gives it back a little bit, giving us a little bit over 512 kilobytes of conventional memory in MS-DOS. Now, it is somewhat desirable to have 640 kilobytes of conventional memory available in MS-DOS. So we'll need to look at the upgrade options that we have here on our Tandy 1000. As we have 4 empty RAM sockets on the main board, let's see how we can upgrade it. Now, a lot of the XT-based systems use these 16-pin DIP RAM chips to provide the conventional memory to the system. And these are readily available in different memory sizes. It's important to note here that these are 16-pin DIP DRAM chips, and unfortunately these don't fit in our Tandy 1000. Because if you look closely, you'll see that the Tandy 1000's RAM sockets expect an 18-pin DIP DRAM chip. Now, you can find these types of memory chips on old video cards, like this Hercules clone video card that I have here. So as you can see, we have 2 18-pin DIP RAM chips here on both video cards, and we'll use those to upgrade our Tandy 1000. So I am going to be carefully removing the RAM chips here. And these are 32 kilobyte chips, as oftentimes these Hercules cards have 64 kilobytes of memory. And if we compare it to the 16-pin XT style RAM chip, you'll see that they have 2 additional legs. So let's add these 4 32 kilobyte chips onto the main board here, giving us an additional 128 kilobytes of RAM to the system. So let's revisit our memory layout. We have added the 4 chips, so we still have the 512 kilobytes of system RAM, we still have the 128 kilobytes of video RAM, but we now have an additional 128 kilobytes of system RAM. So the system reports 768 kilobytes of RAM. That's our additional 128 kilobytes. And when we boot into DOS and load up the mem command, you will see that we have 640 kilobytes of RAM available to MS-DOS, the maximum amount of memory that the system supports. Moving along to the 2 BIOS ROM chips, which are included here with the red and the blue sticker. These actually host the MS-DOS 3.3 and DeskMate software. We have a floppy drive controller chip and the floppy drive connector, allowing you to hook up the floppy drives to the system. Here we have some circuitry for I/O, such as the keyboard and the joysticks. The Tandy 1000 system settings are stored in this little EEPROM chip here. The video chip we discussed earlier when we talked about the RAM configuration of the Tandy. And here we have the PSSJ3 chip, which is part of the Tandy 3 voice sound chip. with some circuitry here for speakers and microphones and volume control. So time to put everything back together, and it's a fairly easy process. So the main board slides in nice into the case. There are lots of screws that we need to tighten up here to fix the main board in place. We have the back plate that just needs one screw. We put the power supply back in. Takes a little bit of wiggling to get it all lined up nicely. And there are 4 or 5 screws that you need to attach the power supply onto the chassis. We have the speaker that we will add here, floppy drive cable, the 5 1/4 inch floppy drive, the 3 1/2 inch floppy drive, the hard drive bay, the volume knob, and the little plastic thingy here on the back that hides all the screws. So we'll carefully clip that back on. And then we're good to go. We just need to close the lid again and our PC is put back together again. So I really hope you've enjoyed this little hardware overview of the Tandy 1000 TL. And if you did, please give this video a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you're interested in this type of content. And I hope to see you guys soon. Bye bye.